My name is Arlo and I am 45 years old. If you ask me what is the biggest pain in my life, I will tell you without hesitation. Being betrayed by the person I love the most. This story goes back to March 2020. I had just had reconstructive knee surgery and was in the middle of a long and painful recovery. I remember it was a sunny Sunday morning as I sat on the couch in my living room, struggling with my rehab moves. Sweat slid down my forehead as I gritted my teeth and fought through the pain. Okay. Hazel's voice came from the kitchen. She's my wife. We've been together since high school. I managed to squeeze out a smile. It's fine, just a little tired. Hazel walks over to me and hands me a glass of water. Her movements are gentle, but I can feel the impatience in her eyes. Since my injury, all the big and small tasks in the house have fallen on her shoulders. I know she's tired, but there's nothing I can do about it. At dinner, the family of four had a rare gathering. Eric, the oldest son, was chatting about his internship experience while Kevin, the youngest son, was complaining about too much homework in high school. I chimed in from time to time, trying to liven things up. But Hazel seemed distracted, checking her cell phone frequently. Something at work? I asked. Hazel looked up at me and said, slightly flustered, "Oh, nothing. Just some papers from a coworker." I nodded, not thinking much about it. At the time, I was naive enough to believe that our relationship was indestructible. A few nights later, I leaned against the bedroom doorframe and watched Hazel get all dolled up in the mirror. She was wearing a sexy black dress I'd never seen before, and her makeup was much more colorful than usual. Going out again? I couldn't help but ask, a hint of loss in my tone. Without looking back, Hazel replied, "Well, there's a project at the company that might require overtime." I looked at my watch and it was almost 9 p.m. A meeting this late? A lot of clients like to talk about things at night these days, Hazel explained, and it might be late, so don't you wait up for me. I sighed and nodded, okay, be safe. After Hazel left in a hurry, the house went quiet. I sat alone in the living room watching TV, but my mind wasn't even on the program. I couldn't help but imagine Hazel and her coworkers working overtime at the office, but something didn't feel right. Late at night, I was awakened by the sound of a key being inserted into a lock hole. I glanced at my bedside alarm clock, and it was after 2 a.m. Hazel crept into the room, smelling faintly of alcohol. I pretended to be asleep, but opened my eyes in the darkness. At that moment, a sense of foreboding came over me. Hazel and I had been together for 28 years and had never doubted her. But at this moment, watching her carefully take off her high heels and gingerly get under the covers, a cloud of suspicion flooded my heart for the first time. Over the next few days, Hazel's overtime became more and more frequent. Sometimes she was away from home 3 or 4 nights a week. I tried to convince myself that this was only temporary and that she would be fine once she finished the project. But my inner turmoil was growing every day. One night, I worked up the courage to ask her, "Honey, have you been too busy lately? It's been a long time since we had a good chat." Hazel froze for a moment, then gave a tired smile. "Yeah, this project is really intense. Let's take a nice trip out when we're done with this one." I nodded, but realized that her smile didn't reach the bottom of her eyes. At that moment, I suddenly realized that the distance between us seemed much farther than I thought. And so, in ignorance and skepticism, our marital crisis sprouted. I, on the other hand, had no idea that a bigger storm was coming. As time passed, my inner turmoil grew stronger. I began to notice some subtle changes in Hazel. She paid more attention to dressing up, often double-checking her makeup in the mirror. Her cell phone seemed to be always on her person, sometimes even bringing it into the bathroom. And she began to frequently mention a coworker named Jason. "Jason says this client is tough, and we may have to stay up late and work overtime," Hazel told me one night. I forced myself to be calm and asked, "Is this Jason a new coworker? I haven't heard you mention it before." Hazel looked a little rattled. "Oh, he joined the company last year and is in charge of our program." I nodded and didn't ask any more questions. But that night, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Early the next morning, I ghosted on my computer and logged into Hazel's social media accounts. The password was still our wedding anniversary, which comforted me a little. However, as I scrolled through her most recent photos, My heart sank to the bottom. I saw Hazel standing with a handsome young man in a group photo from a company party that was invisible to my account. Their standing position may seem casual, but the man's hand is on Hazel's waist, and the smile on Hazel's face is wider than I've seen in a long time. The caption at the bottom of the photo read, "With Jason and other coworkers." I stared at the picture and felt something clench hard in my chest. I told myself that it was probably just a normal interaction between coworkers, but an inner voice kept questioning. Was it really just that? That afternoon, I asked my longtime friend Mike out for coffee. We had known each other since high school, and he was one of the few people who knew all my secrets. "Dude, are you sure?" Mike looked incredulous after hearing my account. "Hazel isn't that kind of person. You guys have been together for so many years." I shook my head bitterly. "I hope I'm wrong too, Mike, but I just have a feeling that something isn't right." Mike was silent for a moment, then said, "Arlo, you need to calm down. Maybe it really is just too much work." "But," he hesitated, "if you're really concerned, you can try to do some research. But be careful not to do anything drastic." I nodded, my mind made up. Over the next few days, I began secretly recording Hazel's every move. I compiled her call logs, time spent away from home, and even attempted to view her text messages. This behavior made me feel ashamed and uncomfortable, but I told myself it was for the sake of our marriage. The other night, I pretended to order takeout on Hazel's cell phone. She hesitated before handing me her phone, and in that brief moment, I saw her quickly delete some messages. This small action deepened my suspicions. Meanwhile, my knee is slowly recovering. The doctor says I'm doing well, but it will take time for me to fully recover. Every time I do rehab, I think of Hazel, who used to be by my side, giving me encouragement. Now there is an invisible wall between us. Late one night, I was once again unable to sleep because of knee pain. Just as I was about to get up to get some painkillers, Hazel's cell phone suddenly lit up. I subconsciously glanced at it and saw a message from Jason on the screen. "Missed you, baby. See you tomorrow." At that moment, I felt like my whole world was falling apart. I closed my eyes and held back the tears that came to my eyes. How I wished it was just a nightmare, but the reality was so cruel. The next morning, I forced myself to stay calm and said goodbye to Hazel as usual. Watching her back as she left, I suddenly realized that our marriage might have come to an end. But I needed more proof. I needed to know the whole truth. And so, in pain and anguish, I began the long process of deposition. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew that no matter what the outcome, my life would be changed as a result. I sat on a park bench that morning, feeling like an outsider as I watched the world continue to spin around me. My mind kept replaying the text message I'd seen last night and all the unusual behavior Hazel had been exhibiting over the past few months. Suddenly, a past event came to my mind. It was the first time Hazel and I met. I was 17 years old, and on the basketball court at school. A missed pass hit Hazel on the sidelines, and I scrambled over to apologize, only to be distracted by her bright smile. At that moment, I knew she was the person I wanted to spend my life with. "Arlo, are you okay?" A familiar voice brought me back to reality. I looked up to see Mike standing in front of me with worry written all over his face. I laughed bitterly. "Good? I think my life is over." Mike sat down next to me and patted me on the shoulder. "Don't say that, man. We'll figure something out. What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. "I need hard evidence, Mike. Not just for the divorce case, but for myself. I need to see it with my own eyes to die completely." Mike was silent for a moment, then said, "I know a friend who works for a security company. Maybe he can help." With that, and with Mike's help, I purchased some high-tech surveillance equipment. That afternoon, while Hazel went shopping at the supermarket, I installed hidden cameras and bugs in our bedroom. My hands were shaking slightly as I pressed the last start button. On the one hand, I was ashamed of my behavior. On the other hand, I desperately wanted to know the truth. At that moment, I realized that I had gone down a path of no return. For the next few days, I stared at my laptop screen like an addict. I watched Hazel's every move around the house and listened to her every call. At first, it was business as usual. But just when I thought I might be being overly paranoid, something happened. It was a Friday afternoon, and Hazel came home early. I suddenly saw an unfamiliar man follow her into the house from the surveillance. It was Jason, and I recognized him immediately. What happened next is more than I care to describe in detail. But that afternoon, in our bedroom, in the home we had shared for over 20 years, Hazel betrayed me and our marriage. I sat in front of my laptop and witnessed the whole thing. My insides were roaring, wanting to go home immediately and storm into the room to question them. But reason told me that now was not the time. I needed this evidence, and I needed to make them pay. When it was all over, I closed my laptop and walked out of the office to the restroom, locked the door in the restroom, leaned against the wall, and slowly slid down to sit on the floor. Then I cried. I couldn't remember the last time I cried like this, probably when my father died. I cried for the love I had lost, for the 28 years we had shared, for my naivety and trust. I don't know how long it took, but I dried my tears and stood up. I looked at myself in the mirror, my eyes red and swollen, my face haggard. But in those eyes, I saw something I had never seen before: determination and anger. I knew that from this moment on, I was no longer the simple trusting Arlo. I'm going to make them pay, and I'm going to make Hazel realize what she's lost. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Mike's number. "I need your help." Mike was silent on the other end of the line for a moment, then said, "I'm listening, bro." And with that, my plan for revenge began. I don't know where this path will take me, but I do know that I will never be the same again. Betrayal changes everything, and I, for one, will be the one to change destiny. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror and scrutinized myself. The man in the mirror had steely eyes and a sneer at the corner of his mouth, as if he was a different person. I straightened my suit and tie and took a deep breath. Today, I'm going to officially start my revenge plan. The first stop was a law firm. I made an appointment with an attorney Mike recommended who specializes in divorce cases, David Thompson. "Mr. Arlo," David said, looking over the documents I had brought with me, "based on the evidence you've provided, we're pretty sure we'll win this case. But are you sure you want to do this? After all, you've been married for over 20 years. I sneered. Over 20 years of marriage, and all she got in return was her fooling around with another man in our bed. "I'm pretty sure of that, Mr. Thompson." David nodded. "Well then, let's start preparing the lawsuit documents. But Mr. Arlo, I suggest you don't hit the hay for now. Keep collecting evidence, the more the better." After leaving the law office, I went straight to a private detective agency. I needed more information about Jason. "Mr. Detective," I said to the middle-aged man sitting behind the desk, "I need you to look into everything about this man: his job, his family, his daily schedule, even what kind of coffee he likes to drink." The private investigator took the envelope I handed him containing Jason's picture and all the information I knew. "No problem, Mr. Arlo. We'll get you the results as soon as we can." Over the next few days, I began a series of self-improvement programs. I stepped up my rehab and kept working out every day. I enrolled in some business courses to learn new skills. I even began studying psychology to try to understand the psychology of cheaters. At the same time, I didn't neglect my social circle. I reconnected with many old friends, including my female friend Sarah, who I've known since our college days and who has always been someone I could confide in. "Arlo, are you okay?" Sarah asked with concern during a coffee date. "You look not quite the same." I gave a long overdue smile. "I'll be fine, Sarah. In fact, I feel more awake than ever." Sarah looked at me thoughtfully. "If you need any help, feel free to let me know, okay?" I nodded, but in the back of my mind, I was planning how to use Sarah to irritate Hazel. Maybe it would be fun to give Hazel a taste of what it would be like to be betrayed. At home, I began to intentionally distance myself from Hazel. I often came home late at night and was always perfunctory with her questions. I could sense her anxiety and unease, but it only gave me a twinge of vengeful pleasure. One night, I pretended to be asleep when I heard Hazel gingerly get up and walk out of the bedroom with her cell phone. I opened my eyes and a sneer curled up at the corner of my mouth. I knew what she was doing. She was messaging Jason. But what Hazel doesn't know is that I've got all her secrets. The private investigator gave me reports detailing every date, every private encounter she had with Jason. I even knew which restaurants they liked to have dinner at and which places they secretly dated. At the same time, I was working in secret. I began to frequent the cafes near Hazel's office, bumping into her coworkers. I purposely acted preoccupied, arousing their curiosity and speculation. I knew that soon the rumors would reach Hazel's ears. Throughout this process, I am also constantly reminding myself not to lose my head. I need to be calm and I need to carefully plan every step. I knew that once I revealed my intentions, all my efforts would go down the drain. Sometimes, late at night when I'm alone, I wonder if I've gone too far. But whenever I think about the scene with Hazel and Jason in our bedroom, the anger and hatred take over me all over again. No, I won't let them go. I'm going to make Hazel realize that not only did she lose a loving husband, she lost a partner she could count on. I'm going to make Jason realize that there's a price to pay for playing with someone's feelings. In this way, my plan for revenge was slowly taking shape in the shadows. I knew that one day, I would let them taste the bitter fruit of betrayal, and that day would be the day I would be reborn. Time slipped by, and it was Thanksgiving Eve. My plans are being implemented step by step, and Hazel seems oblivious to the impending storm. During this time, I deliberately created many coincidences. For example, I would receive a work call late at night and rush out. I would leave some ambiguous text messages on my cell phone. I even intentionally put a note with a woman's name and phone number in my suit pocket, just waiting for Hazel to find it. Sure enough, Hazel reacted just as I expected. She became agitated and often surreptitiously checked my cell phone and computer. A couple of times, I pretended to be asleep when I felt her gently get up and pick up my cell phone. I almost laughed. The evidence she was looking for was all carefully laid out by me. At the same time, my intimate relationship with Sarah became a hot topic in the company, and we often met in the cafeteria near the company, intentionally showing Hazel's colleagues. We often met at a cafe near the office, intentionally for Hazel's colleagues to see, and Sarah knew my situation and was happy to do me a favor. "Are you sure this won't hurt Hazel?" Sarah asked me once with some concern. I laughed bitterly. "Hurt? Sarah, you don't know what she did to me. Believe me, it's not nearly enough." Finally, one afternoon before Thanksgiving, Hazel pressed on. When I walked in the door, she was sitting in the living room, her face grim. "We need to talk," she said, a quiver in her voice. I acted as if nothing had happened. "Talk about what?" "Don't pretend, Arlo." She suddenly raised her voice. "I know you have someone on the outside." "Is it that Sarah?" I resisted the urge to sneer and looked at her in mock surprise. "What are you talking about?" "Sarah is just my friend." "Friends?" Hazel sneered. "Then explain this." She slammed my phone down on the coffee table, the screen displaying several intimate pictures of me and Sarah. I was silent for a moment, then slowly said, "Well, now that you know." "Yes, I'm with Sarah." Hazel's face instantly turned pale. She didn't seem to expect me to admit it so readily. "Why?" she asked shakily. "We've been together for so many years. How could you?" I interrupted. "Why, Hazel? Do you really want me to answer that?" "Maybe you should answer me first. What's going on with you and Jason?" Hazel's expression froze instantly. She looked at me with wide eyes, her lips trembling, but she couldn't utter a word. I continued, "Don't deny it. I know all about it. Every time you meet, every time." "I know everything." Hazel broke down. She fell to her knees and burst into tears. "I'm sorry, Arlo. I'm really sorry. I don't know what's wrong with me. Please forgive me and give me a chance." As I watched her cry in pain, a sudden wave of complex emotions welled up inside me. There was a time when I loved this woman so much that I was willing to give everything for her. And now, I only felt a pang of numbness and disgust. "Forgiveness?" I sneered. "Hazel, do you think betrayal is that easy to forgive?" Just then the doorbell rang. I walked over to open the door and saw our two sons standing outside. The look on their faces told me that they had heard our conversation. Eric, our oldest son, looked at his mother with a somber face. "Mom, is this true?" Hazel froze. She looked at Eric, then Kevin, and finally turned her gaze to me with fear and supplication in her eyes. I took a deep breath and said, "Children, come in. It's time for you to know the truth." That night we had a long and painful family talk. I brought out all the evidence, including the private investigator's report and evidence I had gathered myself. Hazel cried the whole time, sometimes asking for forgiveness, sometimes being silent. Eric and Kevin's reaction was calmer than I expected. Maybe they had sensed something, or maybe they just hadn't fully digested the fact. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Eric asked at last. I glanced at Hazel, then replied, "I've tried to contact a lawyer. Maybe the divorce proceedings will start soon." Hazel jerked her head up and looked at me in disbelief. "Divorce? Arlo, please give me another chance." I shook my head. "It's too late, Hazel. Some things, once done, can never be undone." After that night, the atmosphere in the house became incredibly charged. Before the divorce proceedings began, Hazel began frantically trying to win me back, while I continued my act, sometimes coldly, sometimes ambiguously, keeping her in a constant state of apprehension. On Thanksgiving Day, we barely managed to maintain a semblance of calm and still had a small party at our house. I purposely acted extra enthusiastic, making frequent physical contact with Hazel, as if to suggest that there was still a possibility of us making up. After dinner, when everyone else had left, Hazel approached me and tried to make out. I didn't refuse, but I was unusually calm, even a little cold, throughout the process. I knew that this might be the last time we would ever be intimate. And just like that, my plan was entering its final phase. I knew that a real storm was coming, and Hazel and Jason would pay for their betrayal. On Christmas Eve, it was finally time to close the net on my plan. I spent an entire week organizing all the evidence I had collected into a detailed report. Every photo, every text message, every recording was carefully numbered and annotated by me. I even found a professional designer to make a beautiful picture book out of the information. "Are you sure you want to do this, Arlo?" asked Mike on the phone, concern in his voice. "By doing this, there really is no turning back between you and Hazel." I smiled bitterly. "Mike, from the moment of her first betrayal, there was no turning back between us." On Christmas Eve, I told Hazel that I had an important work meeting and that I might not be back until late. She nodded, a flash of disappointment in her eyes. I knew she had expected us to spend this Christmas Eve together, as we had done for the past 20 years or so. But this year is different. This year, Christmas Eve will be the funeral of our marriage. I drove to a fancy hotel in the center of town. There, I booked a luxury suite. Inside the room, I scrutinized all the equipment, the hidden camera, the tape recorder, and the gifts I had carefully prepared. At 9 p.m., I texted Hazel, "Honey, I'm off work. Is it convenient for you now? I'm at the Emerson Hotel, room number 2008. I have a surprise for you." Within half an hour, Hazel appeared at the door of the room. She was wearing a red dress I'd never seen before, and with her elaborate makeup, she looked extraordinarily attractive. "Arlo, this is—" she asked with some confusion as she looked around the room. I smiled and walked up and gave her a deep hug. "Merry Christmas, honey. I wanted to give you a special surprise." Hazel's eyes lit up, and she took the initiative to kiss me. I responded to her passion, but inside I was unusually calm. I knew that this would be our last intimate encounter. Just then there was another knock on the door of the room. Hazel jumped in surprise and looked at me warily. "You invited someone else?" I smiled a secretive smile. "Yeah, I invited someone who is important to us both." I walked over to the door and Jason stood outside with confusion and a hint of unease on his face. "Arlo, what's going on here?" he asked, his eyes darting back and forth between Hazel and me. I made an inviting gesture. "Come on in, Jason. You're the star of the show tonight." Jason hesitated, but walked in. Hazel's face instantly turned pale, and she looked over at me shakily. "Arlo, you?" I interrupted. "Don't be nervous, honey. I just wanted to surprise you guys." I walked to the center of the room and clapped my hands. Instantly, a dozen or so displays lit up on the walls around the room, each playing images of Hazel and Jason cheating on each other. Hazel let out a scream and covered her mouth with her hands in disbelief. Jason, on the other hand, stood frozen in place, his face blue. "How's that for a surprise?" I sneered. "I spent most of the year preparing this special Christmas present for you." For the next half hour, I showed them in detail all the evidence I had gathered. Every date, every intimate encounter, even their sweet talk on the phone, I presented it all to them. Hazel breaks down. She falls to her knees and cries in pain, "Arlo, please forgive me." Jason, on the other hand, tries to be defensive. I raised my hand to stop him. "Stop it, Jason. I'm tired of hearing every lie, every excuse from you guys." I turned to Hazel with ice in my eyes. "Hazel, do you remember our wedding vows? To love and care for each other always, in good times and bad, for richer and poorer, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Unfortunately, you chose to end our marriage with betrayal." I took out a stack of papers and put them on the table. "Here are the divorce papers. If you have any conscience left, sign it painfully." Hazel shakily picked up her pen, tears blurring her vision. She looked at me with a prayer in her eyes. "Arlo, is there really no turning back?" I shook my head. "Some damage, once done, can't be repaired. Goodbye, Hazel." With that, I turned and left the room. Hazel's cries and Jason's sighs came from behind me, but I didn't look back. I knew that from this moment on, a new page had been turned in my life. A year later in the summer, I stood in front of the courthouse with the final divorce decree in my hand. The sun was shining and the breeze was light, as if heralding the beginning of a new life. "Dad." A familiar voice came from the distance. I turned my head to see Eric running towards me. He had graduated from college and was working for a well-known company. "What did the judge say?" he asked a little nervously. I smiled and held up the papers in my hand. "All is well. As of today, I'm a free agent." Eric sighed in relief and patted my shoulder. "Great. By the way, Aunt Sarah asked me to ask you if you want to have dinner together tonight to celebrate." Although Eric is the child of Hazel and I, but as an adult, has long had the ability to distinguish right from wrong, Hazel's betrayal of the marriage not only hurt me, but also deeply hurt the children at the same time. Hearing Sarah's name, a warmth flooded my heart. During these 6 months, Sarah has been by my side, giving me unlimited support and encouragement. Although we are still just friends, I know that there are infinite possibilities in the future. "Yeah," I nodded. "Let's celebrate the start of a new life." The moment we walked out of the courthouse, I looked back. Hazel stood in the distance, alone, watching us. We looked at each other with regret and sadness in her eyes, but I just nodded faintly and turned away. It is said that love is the most beautiful thing in the world, but betrayal is the most painful experience. I have experienced the sweetness of love and tasted the bitter fruit of betrayal, but I know that life goes on. No matter what awaits me ahead, I will face it openly, because I realize that sometimes an end is also a new beginning. 3 years have passed. Today was a special day, my wedding to Sarah. Standing in front of the church mirror, I straightened my bow tie and thought back over the years. Eric was busy directing the groomsmen to set up the scene, while Kevin was nervously reciting his speech. A warm feeling welled up in my heart as I watched their busy figures. Despite the storm, the three of us had grown closer than ever before. "Dad, are you okay?" Eric asked, concerned, as he walked over. I smiled. "I'm fine, son. In fact, I've never felt better." Eric patted me on the shoulder. "I'm happy for you, Dad. Sarah is a great woman, and you guys deserve to be happy." I nodded, my heart filled with gratitude. Yes, Sarah was indeed a good woman. In my darkest days, she was the one who stayed by my side and gave me strength and courage. Our relationship was slowly cultivated on the basis of mutual understanding and trust. The wedding went well. My heart skipped a beat when I saw Sarah walking towards me in her white wedding dress. There was a happy glint in her eyes and a sweet smile at the corner of her mouth. At that moment, I knew I had made the right choice. The vows were said, the rings were exchanged, the kisses were exchanged, and everything was so beautiful. When the pastor announced that we were officially husband and wife, the whole church erupted in applause. At the wedding reception in the evening, I unexpectedly noticed Hazel hiding in the corner. It was the first time we met since the divorce. She looked much more haggard, and her eyes were filled with mixed emotions. Our eyes met in the air, and she forced a smile. I nodded in response, then turned and plunged into the celebrating crowd. At that moment, I suddenly realized that I had let go. All that pain, anger, and resentment had gone with the wind. Now I just want to live well and cherish the happiness in front of me. It was late at night, and the guests were leaving one by one. Sarah and I sat in the empty ballroom, holding hands and enjoying the peace and quiet of our world as a duo. Thinking about what? Sarah asked softly. I took a deep breath. I was thinking about how amazing life is. A few years ago, I thought my life was over. But now, I feel like it's just beginning. Sarah smiled gently. Life is like that. It will always surprise us. The important thing is that we have to face it bravely and never give up. I nodded and held her hand tightly. Thank you, Sarah, for giving me the courage to start over. Sarah leaned over my shoulder and whispered, we're going to be happy like this forever, right? I kissed her forehead. I will, I promise. This time, I will fulfill my vow with my life. Looking back, I have to admit that that experience changed me completely. It made me understand the value of trust and taught me to cherish the happiness in front of me. Betrayal and hurt are inevitable in life, but what matters is how we cope with it and how we draw strength from it to become stronger. Nowadays, I am no longer the naive and innocent Arlo, nor the hateful avenger. I am a middle-aged man who has weathered the storms, knows how to cherish, and is brave enough to face life. I know that there will be challenges and difficulties on the road ahead, but as long as I have Sarah by my side and the support of my children, I am confident to face everything. As the night wore on, Sarah and I slowly walked out of the banquet hall, holding hands. Tomorrow, we will start our honeymoon. And after that, a whole new chapter of life will be waiting for us. I gave Sarah a deep look, my heart filled with gratitude and love. Yes, this time, I will cherish it and never let the tragedy repeat itself. Because I understand that true happiness is not to get, but to cherish. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.